Right, so we are live, I believe. Okay, once I see the chat, I believe we're live. I think we're live. Okay. Piali mohuantin, kenihki initstoke, namanti momachtice, tlenika, tlachihualistli, clase C, one clase nawi. Hi everyone, today we're going to be learning about the verbs of class 1 and class 4 verbs. We're going to be learning about the past. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you're not seeing my screen. For people who are watching on YouTube live, I will see your comments. If you have any comments at the end of the class, which is like in the 40-ish, 50-ish minute mark. So if you put questions there, I'm not watching the comments until the end, but definitely put your comments on there if you have any comments or questions. All right, so let's see. And let me share my screen. Let me know if you are not seeing my screen. Share. And let's share the class. All right, definitely ask me questions, the people who are live, if you have any, because we're gonna cover the past tense. In Nahuatl, the past tense in Nahuatl is one of the more complex tenses in Nahuatl, but it's actually not that hard compared to other languages like Spanish. Spanish has a very complex way of expressing the past, well, not just the past, really any tense. Nahuatl has a complex system, but it's not that complex compared to Spanish. And English has a very simple past, well, kind of simple, mostly simple past. This past that I'm talking about is the preterite. Okay, so what we're gonna be learning is how do you know what class a verb belongs to? And then we're gonna learn the past tense of the class 1 verbs and the class 4 verbs. Okay, so like I said, in Nahuatl, every verb belongs to a class, every verb. And you need to know which class that verb belongs to. There are 4 classes of verbs, class 1, 2, 3, and 4. Last week, we learned the past tense of class 3 verbs. Class 3 verbs are like the simplest verbs because generally you drop the A and then you change the tense. That's how you change the tense of almost all the class 3 verbs. However, when you want to do the past tense of any other verb, you have to look up what class it belongs to. There are some general patterns that Nahuatl follows for the classes, but I don't want to get it all complicated like, oh, it ends with this or it ends with that. Really, honestly, at the end of the day, you look them up in the dictionary and you can find out what class it belongs to. After a lot of practice, you will know what class a verb belongs to because you've learned the past tense multiple times. You know what the past tense is. That's how I know it now. I'll tell you that the majority of verbs in Nahuatl are class 2 verbs. We're not covering class 2 verbs this week. We're covering class 2 verbs next week, but the majority are class 2 verbs. The word for verb in Nahuatl is tlachihualistli. It literally means things that are done. Tlachihualistli, things that are being done. So that's why it means verb. This word tlachihualistli also means like things that are done, but it also translates as verb. If you don't know the class of a verb, you're going to consult the dictionary, and that is what I'm going to talk to you about. If you go back to season 1, episode 9, I talked to you about how to use the dictionary, and at that time I told you, hey, you're going to need to know what class verb a verb is because of the past tense. So now that we're covering the past tense, you could go consult episode 9 on season 1, and then you'll know exactly how to use the dictionary, but I am going to go over it here. If you remember from that lecture, I told you Personal Lexicon, the Tlahtol Xitlahcayot, the Totlahtol Nahuatl app, and the Oregon University Nahuatl Dictionary. Those were the 4 dictionaries that I was recommending at that time. And so I'm going to go through an example of each of them of how you find that information. So if you remember, I just told you that the word for verb in Nahuatl is tlachihualistli. Okay, so if you go look at that big PDF, which is called the Tlahtol Xitlahcayot, if you remember, maybe you don't, but that dictionary is a dictionary that has all the definitions of verbs in Nahuatl, but it's only written in Nahuatl. So for example, here I have an entry. It says Xochinamaca, which you may or may not know means to sell flowers. Xochinamaca. And if you notice after Xochinamaca, it says Tlach. That tlach is coming from the word tlachihualistli. Tlachihualistli means verb, and then you see this number after it that says a number 1. That tells you that this verb xochinamaca is a class 1 verb. Okay? Another hint, if you look over here in the word panok, panok means it happened. And under panok, they give you the form of this verb in past tense. So it says panok xochinamacak. So that tells you if you want to put this verb xochinamaca into the past tense, you're going to make it xochinamacak. And as you can tell, this is a class 1 verb, so we're going to learn about class 1 verbs now, or in this lesson. So this panok is talking about the preterite. When I say preterite, that's a fancy way of saying the past tense, but if you go look in grammar terms, you'll learn that preterite means specifically, I did this. Because if you go and learn other tenses, you'll learn that there's different tenses like I was doing, I used to do, and Nahuatl has different tenses for those. But for now, we're just learning the simple past, which is in this one, xochinamaca, to sell flowers, it would be he or she sold flowers. So that's that same tense, the sold part. Okay, so this is telling you it's a class 1 verb, and its form is xochinamacak. You could look at other verbs right here, like xochimana. You see it says tlachihualistli 2 or ome. And for some reason, this one doesn't say, oh, this one says that that its root, that this verb is never used by itself. So that's why it doesn't give you the example. But if it were used by itself, it would be a class 2 verb. But if you look over here, we have xochinamaquia. If you notice, this is an IA verb. It says tlachihualistli 3. So if you remember, this is a class 3 verb, and it's telling you that yeah, this is a class 3 verb, and this one tells you right here, the past tense is xochinamaqui or xochinamaquihqui, which if you remember last week when we learned class 3 verbs, you could have xochinamaqui that way or xochinamaquihqui because it's a class 3 verb. Okay. If you go use the Oregon University Dictionary, they have it under EDS Grammatica. So here, this verb qua, which means to eat, they have it as tlachihualistli nawi, a class 4 verb. And so you would use the class 4 verbs rules to create the past tense of this one. I guess they don't show you what the past tense looks like in this one, but that's why I like the Tlahtolchitlacayot that gives you the past tense form. If you're using the Nahuatl app, the Totlahtol Nahuatl, same thing. Here it spells it out as tlachihualistli, and then it has the number, and here it says class 1. So for this verb, Itta, which means to see, this verb is a class 1 verb, and we'll learn later that the past tense would be itak. And don't get confused by the number after the verb, because a lot of people think that this means that Itta is a class 2 verb. This is saying that this is not a class 2 verb. This is saying that this is the second version of the verb Itta, because there's another entry in the dictionary that's the Itta version 1, and this is Itta version 2. So don't get confused by this number. This is just saying, oh, this is the second verb that is also Itta. But tlachihualistli and the number, that's the class of the verb. All right. Oh, I guess I didn't cover the personal lexicon. In personal lexicon, the entries are going to look just like the Tlahtolchitlacayot. So they'll look just like this in personal lexicon. Not all the entries have a past tense in them, but the entries will look very similar. Just look for tlach or tlachihualistli, and it'll tell you what class verb it is. So now you know how to know what class verb it is. That's very important in creating the past tense of a verb. Okay, so now let's basically revisit these words. So the word for naman, right? If you remember from last week, naman, today or now, naman. Or yalwaya, yesterday, tlempanok, yalwaya. In other varieties, it's just yalwa. Okay, so now we're gonna cover tlempanok class 1 verbs. We're gonna talk about the past tense. Okay, so here I'm gonna give you some examples. Konet mitzita naman. Konet mitzita naman. konet mitzita naman. ¿Cuál? Tlacatl, tlacatl, michnamaca naman. Tlacatl, michnamaca naman. Sihuatl, mitzmaca, xochitl, naman. Sihuatl, mitzmaca, xochitl, naman. Okay. And ya, kiasi, setetl, naman. Okay, I hope that the definitions are clear for these verbs, but if they're not, I believe I have a slide that has the definitions, okay? Oh, and this is the last verb I'm going to teach you today. Tlacat, kiqui, ima, siwatl, naman. So tlacat, kiqui, ima, siwatl, naman. Okay? So, yalwaya, konet, mitzitak. Yalwaya, konet, mitzitak. Notice now it's not mitzita, it's mitzitak. Tlacat, tlacat michnamacak yalwaya. Tlacat michnamacak yalwaya. Siwatl mitzmacac xochitl yalwaya. Ooh, I put naman in there, it should be yalwaya. Mitznamacac xochitl yalwaya. Okay? And ya, kiasik, setetl, yalwaya. Okay? And tlacatl, kikwik, ima, siwatl, yalwaya. Okay. So if you notice the pattern, these verbs that are class 1 verbs, when they're in the past, all you do is add a C. That's it. So Itta becomes itak, namaca becomes namakak, maca becomes makak, asi becomes asik, and qui becomes quick. Okay? That's for the one person, right? So all you're doing is adding a C. That's it. So here are the definitions in case you were wondering, in case it wasn't clear from the pictures. Itak, saw. Namakak, sold. Makak, gave. Asik, found. And quick, took or grabbed. If you remember from last week, I taught you this verb pantilla, which also meant to find something. But notice that this verb asik means to find something in general, whereas the verb pantilla means to find something by surprise. So there's a slight difference in definition. If you're just finding something, it's just asik. But if you're finding something by chance, it becomes pantihki, which you learned last week in class 3 verbs. Okay, so here are the 6 different forms. Nikitak, na nikitak, ta tikitak, ya kiitak, tohuantin tikitake. Notice that this k becomes ke now, tikitake. And notice that the stress changes. Over here it was tikitak, the I was the highest, tikitak. And over here, once we add the ke, the second to the last syllable becomes the A, not the I. So now we have tikitake, okay? Y'all saw it, inkitake, and they saw it, kitake. And notice when these I's are together, we slightly elongate them. So it becomes from quiitta, it becomes quiitak. Basically quiitta, when these I's are together, you do elongate them. Now there are some varieties in Central Nahuatl, they would just say kitak, or they would say kitake. So some varieties do join them together, so be aware. But in our variety, we slightly elongate it. Okay, cuali. Xicpatla inin tlachihualistli. So change these verbs. ¿Cuál? So we're gonna practice now. Hopefully the lesson is clear enough that you can change these verbs, but if you can't, I'll give you some time to think and then I will help you. Okay? ¿Cuál? So, Xicpatla y Icatlempanok, Tlenquistosnequi. So first, Xicpatla y Catlempanok, and then Teipan, Tlenquistosnequi. So I'm gonna let you think about it, like 1 or 2 minutes, and then whoever is brave, whoever thinks they could do all 6 of these, you know, tell me, and or you raise your hand on Zoom, and we can do it. Don't be scared. Don't worry about messing up. Learning a language means you're gonna mess up, so do it. Okay? So I will wait. If you don't want to be recorded, then you don't have to participate, but you could also put your answers in the chat. So let me look at the chat. Let's see. Show me the chat. All right, does anybody think they could do it? If yes, say nah. If no, say, don't say anything, or you could type your answers in the chat.
Nah. I'll
All
give
right.
it a shot.
This call is being recorded.
I know. Okay.
All right, Lishe, let's go.
Niteita would be niteitak,
Ajá, ¿cuál?
titeitak,
Kena.
teitak,
Ajá, ¿cuál?
titeitake,
¿Cuál? Titeitake. Ajá.
inteitake,
Teitake.
and teitake.
Teitake. ¿Cuál? ¿Cuál? Okay. And Tlenquitosnequi.
So I see people, or I saw people.
Kena.
So if we did all in past tense, then it would be you saw people, he or she saw people, we saw people, y'all saw people, and they saw people.
¿Cuál? Notice, yes, you got it. ¿Cuál? This te can translate as people, or it could also translate as one person, someone. We don't know who. So it can mean both people or some one person. It's very vague in Nahuatl. So niteitak could mean I saw someone, or it could mean I saw people. But you translated it with people. That's perfectly acceptable answer. ¿Cuál? ¿Cuál? All right. All right, so now I'm going to give you some new verbs that are also class 1 verbs, and hopefully you can convert them. Okay? So, inin koskat, 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 koskat. Okay? Inin koskat. ¿Cuál? Seakajia. I know these sentences are more complex because I expect you to know more. And if you don't know what certain parts mean, definitely ask me. I'm making bigger sentences on purpose so that you start learning more vocabulary, okay? So this is a sample sentence that I created. Seakajia kinamaka koskat naman. Oh, did I write naman? Yeah. Seakajia kinamaka koskat naman. So this is the example. Does everybody know what this means? Does anybody have a question of, ooh, that should be seakajia right there?
Oh, that was my question. So it's seakaya with a CE.
See, I messed up, yeah.
So someone though, right?
Kena. So you saw in the other example that I was I used that te to mean someone, right? And in this case, I'm using a separate word, seakajia. So now what does have a standalone word for someone, and that word is seakajia. One thing to separate in your mind that I wasn't very conscious of when I was learning Nahuatl is that Nahuatl makes a difference between who's doing the action and who's receiving the action. So if you want to say that someone is doing an action, you're gonna say seakajia always. So in this case, seakajia kinamaka, someone sells koskat naman. Someone sells necklaces now. Kena? So here, seakajia is a person doing an action. Someone is doing an action. In those cases, you always use seakajia. one thing people might want to do is say right here, tenamaca, and thinking like, oh, someone sells. But tenamaca would be incorrect because if you put te here, te is the object. Te is the one receiving the action. So if you write tenamaca, it means he or she sells people, which is terrible. So tenamaca is not something you want to say. So you have to distinguish who's doing the action versus who is receiving the action. If you put tenamaca in you put the te there, it means the person is receiving the action. So when we had it as ni te itak, right here, I am the one who is seeing someone. And there, so I'm doing the action, someone's receiving the action. So here, te itak, someone is receiving the action of he or she. So putting that te means there is that the te is receiving the action. It does not mean that someone is doing an action. So don't get them confused. Okay, that's why I put that there. Okay, so sea kahia kinamaka koskat naman. Kuali? So now, shikpatla ikatlempanok. Shikpatla ikatlempanok. So hopefully you understood the command, but if you didn't, I will wait until somebody understands the command and possibly answers the question. If not, I will eventually answer the question. So
I don't want to keep, I don't want to keep or like be the only one to answer so no one else can, but it's Sea kaya kinamakak kotskat yawaya.
Ali? No, don't worry. I mean, some people just don't want to be recorded, or some people don't know, but I do encourage people who don't know to try, because you're not going to know what you're doing wrong until you try. And then I could be like, oh, well, this is the part you should change. So I encourage you to participate, but I'm not going to force you. Me, I'm an introvert and I hate people who force me to participate. So I'm not going to force you to participate, but I'm going to encourage you if you want to. Okay? All right. So this is another sample sentence. Inin teska, inin tekakli. Inin tekakli. Seakahia kinamaka tekakli. So notice it says this word here, and seaka. Ooh, another typo. Ooh, that's not good. I don't like these typos. Okay. Seakahia kinamaka. Seakahia kinamaka tekakli. Naman. Okay. Naman shikpatla ikatlempanok. Shikpatla ikatlempanok. So you've been wondering what this verb patla means? It means change. So shikpatla. If you don't know what that command means, think about it. And also look back at, I have a lesson on just on commands. So anytime there's a she in front of a verb, it's a command. So shikpatla, change as a command. So shikpatla ikatlempanok.
Say akahia kinamakak tekatli yawaya.
Kuali. Se akahia kinamakak. So all we did was change this part, and we also changed from naman to yalwaya. Kuali. And inin makostli. Inin makostli. Kuali. Inihuantin quiitta. Inihuantin quiitta makostli naman. Inihuantin quiitta makostli naman. Okay, ¿cuál? Shikpatla ikatlempanok. Shikpatla ikatlempanok. Okay, Kena. Somebody says makostli is bracelet. Kena. Look at the picture, look at my hand. Makostli. Vale. Inin makostli. So, kenihki moilia ikatlempanok.
Kiitake.
Kena. So this quiitta becomes quiittaque. So naman quiitta yalwaya quiittaque macostli. Yalwaya quiittaque macostli. Why? Because there's more than one of them, right? It's not just one person, so it's not quiittac. Why? Inihuantin quiitta Michnamacahquetl. I know this word is big, and I'm pretty sure you can figure out what it means because we had that adjectives class. But if you don't, there's a class called agents in the past, and it tells you what this get means. But here, ya se michnamacahquetl. Michnamacahquetl. Michin namaka. Michnamaca, ya se michnamacahquetl. Okay. So inihuanti quiitta michnamacahquetl naman. Chicpatla ica tlempano.
Itak.
Okay, so quiittac is for one person, but how many people are there?
Oh, I didn't see that. I was looking at the fish guy. Kiitake.
Kena. You also know that it's more than one person because we have here quiitta with an H. Now, when
Yes.
you're listening, it's going to be hard for you to hear it all the time. But generally, I'll tell you that through context, you can know what they're talking about because of whatever you're talking about. So most of the time, this little H doesn't actually cause confusion, but it is there. What is quiit? Okay, so if you recognize this verb Itta, this is Itta. Itta. This key is in there. There's a class. Go back to a class called Transitive Verbs. But basically, this key is there to indicate that an action is being done to another object. Now, what requires you to indicate what is receiving the action. So this key is really translates as it, or it could also translate as he or she. So quiitta means they see it, or they see him, or they see her. In this case, it's talking about this michnamacahquet. So in this case, it means her. So it says they, it says to her, they see. So really it's saying they see her. They see her. So this key here means her. In different contexts, this key could mean it, or it could mean he or she. I mean, it could mean he. Because she's a woman and she's the michnamacahquet here, it's talking about her. ¿Vale? And if you all know about the lecture, Michnamacahquet means, or you probably can tell, fish seller. Fish seller. Nahuatl doesn't have a gender in terms of like saying male or female. So here Michnamacahquet could be a male or it could be a female. We know it's a female because of the picture. But if you remember, if you look in the past, we had that other man who was selling fish. We could also call him a Michnamacahquet because there's no gender in Nahuatl. You could specify gender if you were to say siwa Michnamacahquet, but it's not necessary, and most native speakers are not going to distinguish between male or female. They're just going to say Michnamacahquet. And you'll know who you're talking about, so you'll know if they're male or female, or in between, or whatever. Okay. ¿Cuál? So, icatlempanok, it would become quiittaque. It wouldn't be quiittac, because if we say quiittac, that would be one person, quiittac, right? One person saw this person, saw her. But because it's multiple people looking at her, it becomes quiittaque. They saw her, quiittaque. Quiittaque michnamacahquet yalguaya. I know this word is hard. Just practice, but it's michnamacahquet. Now it has a lot of long words, so eventually you're gonna get used to it. Just know it's always stressed on the second to last syllable. So here it's michnamacahquet. This C with this C before a Q, even though we write it as a C, it's actually pronounced as an H. So it's michnamacah with the aspiration, michnamacahquet. I know it's weird at the beginning, and when you see the practical alphabet, they'll write it as a J here. But we're using the classical alphabet, that's why we're writing with the C. But in the The practical alphabet, they write it with the J because that's how they pronounce it. Okay, so essentially class 1 is pretty simple because all you're really gonna do is add the C or add the que. C if it's one person and que if it's more than one person, plural, okay? But now we're gonna look to class 4 verbs. Okay, so I'm gonna give you the examples in the present tense and then give you an example in the past tense. So ya tlapa iselti naman. Okay, so you probably can figure out what tlapa means. Ya tlapa, but what does this iselti mean? Does anybody know?
I think from last week, it's by him or herself.
Kena, ¿cuál? So you remembered, ¿cuál? So ya tlapa iselti naman. ¿Cuál? So she paints by herself. Now, ¿cuál? Ya tlaqua miak naman. Does anyone know what, well, you probably can figure out what tlaqua means, but what, does anyone know what miak means?
So tlaca is a verb, right? Tlaqua?
Kena, tlaqua.
Eats.
Ya tlaqua. Miak.
Miak, she eats alone?
Alone would be iselti.
Oh, okay.
But this one is miak. Maybe you
The
heard
food.
me say, no. So maybe you've heard me say tlazokamati and or you might have heard me say tlazokamati miak. Can you figure out based on that context?
She eats food. I don't know. I honestly wouldn't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. So a lot. This word is very common. So this is a lot. She eats a lot. Look at how much she's eating. When you say somebody eats something, it's just the verb is qua. But this tla indicates that something is being eaten. So Nahuatl, in some verbs that are called transitive verbs, Nahuatl requires you to indicate what they are eating. In this case, the verb qua is a transitive verb, so you must indicate what they are eating. Because we don't want to specify everything that she's eating, we just say tla. Tla means things. So when we say ya tlaqua, we're saying she eats things. It could also be translated as she eats in general. Because Nahuatl, if you want to say something in general, you would put it as tla. So you say ya tlaqua, she eats, or she eats things. It translates as both of those things. She eats or she eats things. Okay, so here ya tlaqua miak, she eats a lot. Naman. If there was a food here, like let's say we were to say she eats, I don't know, what do you want to say she eats?
Tostada.
She eats a tostada. I don't know the word for tostada in Nahuatl. Maybe it would be something like
Michin would be a fish.
Platistli or something. A fish, let's say fish. This tla would not remain as tla, it would become ki. So we would say yaquiqua michin. Why did we change it to ki? Because if you remember, when you put this ki in front of a verb, this ki means it. So now what would literally say, it eats fish. It eats fish. But it really would just translate as she eats fish. So this tla would change into ki because now you're specifying what she's eating. So we say ya quiqua michin, she eats fish. So now it makes a distinction whether she's doing it in general or whether she's doing it specifically to something. And that's something a lot of people mess up, so that's why I pointed out. ¿Cuál? All right. Daniela Quinawa Ikone naman. Daniela Quinawa Ikone nama kena. Okay. Although this word nawa is more specific than just hugs, but we'll talk about that. Okay, and Maria or Mario Kimama
Carries.
So yeah, kena. Ikone naman.
Ikone baby.
It is baby, but specifically his baby. So if you go back to the class on possessives, you'll learn that ikone means his baby. His. This is the his part. Okay. Okay. So now ikatlempanok Ya tlapahki. Ya tlapahki. Iselti yalguaya. Ya tlapahki. Iselti yalguaya. Ya tlacuahki. Iselti yalguaya. And Daniela Kinawahki Ikone Yalguaya. And Mario Kimamahki Ikone Yalguaya. Okay, so these are the past tense forms, obviously. So if you notice, there are one of the interesting things about Nahuatl is Nahuatl only really has 4 main class 4 verbs, and these are the 4. That's why I only gave you 4 examples. But actually, there's more. But for the most part, the class 4 verbs are these: pa, to paint something; qua, to eat something; mama, to carry something on your back, on someone's back; and nawa, it does not mean to hug necessarily, it means to hold somebody and carry them in your arms. But you'll see that the word for hug is very similar, okay? But here nawa, it is kind of like hugging, but it's carrying them in your arms. Holding them and carrying them in your arms, okay? ¿Cuál? So, as you saw, to convert them to the past tense, pa becomes pahki. So there's this extra H in there that you insert. So it's not paki, it's pahki, pahki. Qua becomes cuahki, mama becomes mamahki, and nawa becomes nawahki. Okay, these are the 4 main verbs, but there actually are other verbs that are class 4 verbs that look very similar to these verbs and pretty much are like derived from these verbs. And any verbs that are derived from these verbs are class 4 verbs. So essentially, if it ends in nawa, if it ends in mama, if it ends in qua, if it ends in pa, it's a class 4 verb. Okay, so these are the 6 forms. Nitlapahki, I painted. Titlapahki, you painted. Tlapahki, he or she painted. Titlapahke, we painted. Intlapahke, y'all painted. Tlapahke. If you notice, I put this little space in front of these verbs. This means that this verb is a transitive verb. This means that it requires an object at all times. So if you notice that I said over here, ni tlapahki, I didn't say ni pahki. You would think, oh, I painted ni pahki. But now what requires you to say what you painted? Because we're not saying what we painted, we're putting the tla there, just like as a placeholder to say, we paint things. So you would never see it as ni pahki. It would always have to have something there. So ni tlapahki, I painted. Literally, it's I painted things. So it could be translated as I painted things or I painted. Or I painted something is another translation. Ni tlapahki. Titlapahki, tlapahki. So you'll never see these verbs with the space in front of them by themselves. There's always going to be some kind of object there. Okay, so like let's say you're saying I paint a flower. The word for flower is xochi, xochitl. So we would say ni xochipa, ni xochipa. I paint a flower, ni xochipa, or I painted a flower, ni xochipahki. That xochi being placing it there takes the place of the object that you're doing the action. So you don't need the tla. You can just put the xochi there. If you want to say I ate a flower, ni Nimichcuahqui. I carried a flower on my back, ni xochimamahki. I held and carried a flower on my arms, ni xochinahuahki. Okay, but you always have to have some kind of object there. Now what requires it? If you don't know this, go back to the class on transitive verbs. Not all verbs are transitive, but the ones that are transitive always require an object. Okay, so naman shikpatla ikatlempanok. Okay, so I'm gonna give you some examples, and then you're gonna shikpatla ikatlempanok. Okay, ya ixpa iwampo naman ixpa. Okay, so notice this verb ixpa, ixpa. ¿Cuál? Okay, Chikpatla ikatlempanok. So notice this verb ixpa. Chikpatla ikatlempanok.
Quiichpaqui or quiichpaqui.
Quiichqahqui. ¿Cuál?
Ixpa.
So ixpa is paints right now. Paints her face right now. But ixpahqui is the past tense. Tlempanok. So
Iwampo.
Iwampo. Oh, wampo means friend. So Iwampo, her friend. So ixpahqui Iwampo yalwaya. She painted her friend's face yesterday. This verb, notice that this verb is not pa. It does mean pa means to paint. But notice that this has this prefix ish. If you go back, or maybe you paid attention in other classes, the word ishtli is an old word in Nahuatl that meant face or surface or eyes. In this case, she's painting her face. So we're saying ki ixpa. So we know here literally saying it, her face, paints, she did. So she painted her face. It's basically what it says.
She painted her friend's face.
Her friend's face. So this here is kind of ambiguous who's doing it to who, but she's the one doing it to her friend. So this ki is not referring to her. This ki is referring to her. Because she's the one receiving the action. She's the one doing the action. So this ki is her, but this her is this her. Okay, so to her, face, paint, she did. So she painted her face. Quiitta. Iwampo, her friend. Yalwaya, wali. All right. Ya moishpa naman. Ya moishpa naman.
I paint my face?
Kena. But in this case, it's not I, because I don't have this me in front of here.
She.
Right?
She.
So she paints whose face?
Her face.
Her own face. Kena. So if you go back, I have a lesson called motetla. And in that lesson, I tell you about this prefix mo. When you have this mo prefix in front of a verb, it means that you're doing an action. The same person who's doing the action is the same person receiving the action. So she is the one doing it to herself. Ya moishpa naman. So she paints her own face to herself. If I change this to ni moishpa, ni, remember ni, then I'm saying I paint my own face. Ni moishpa. Or I put on makeup or whatever. I paint my own face. Ni moishpa. So ya ni moishpa naman. So xipatla ikat lempanok.
So let me get this straight. I'm pretty sure I already know this, but in Nahuatl, you kind of have to guess because it's a little chopped up. So they say like, oh, she paints her face, but in reality, if you were to translate it to any other language, it'd be like she paint face her or something like that. You see what I'm saying?
No, this mo is saying to herself. So this would be she to herself paints face.
But you as individuals who speak, like, obviously my first language is Spanish, but
it would be se in Spanish. Se pinta la cara. This mo would be like se. Yo
but in
me pinto la cara.
In Nahuatl, do you have to figure it out is my question. Like, do you have to kind of figure out what the person's trying to tell you? Or was it very articulate to the point where they were like, I know exactly what he's saying?
They would know exactly with this moishpa, they would know exactly who you're talking about.
So it's very, very articulate.
This is very clear in Nahuatl. Ya moishpa naman, she to herself paints. And if this would be ni moishpa, it would be clear that it's me to myself. Because I'm putting, this mo is the reflexive, like saying the person who's doing the action is also the person receiving the action. So if saying ni moishpa, it would be clear, I to myself. If you say ti moishpa, it would be very clear, you to yourself. Ti moishpa, we to ourselves. In moishpa, y'all to yourself. So this mo is just saying the same person who's doing the action is the same person receiving the action. Here, what may be unclear to you, and I don't know your level, but basically Nahuatl doesn't put a prefix to say he or she. So there's a blank space here that says he or she is doing something, but Nahuatl doesn't have a prefix for it. So because there's no prefix, it's implied that he or she is doing something because there's nothing in front of here saying who's doing something. And that's kind of unclear at the very beginning when you're first learning Nahuatl, but when there is not a prefix indicating who's doing it, it's a third person. So here moishpa is he or she is doing to himself or herself.
Yes, I do know that they don't describe woman or man. It's just kind of like assumed by seeing or talking.
Yeah, was your question like, would they know who the person is that in here? Because like here, we don't know if it's a he or she. From the sentence, if you don't see the picture, you don't know who we're talking about. Is that your question?
Well, I have 2 books, and I've done like 3 chapters and 4 chapters on one. But I do like what I see. It'll be like michime,
Michime,
michime, right? Like fishes, right? Or like chichime, or
Chichime.
yeah, chichime, and then siwato, and then siwatome, or siwame, right? So like I learned that, but sometimes I was just confused, and I would think like, did my ancestors like think that like did they have to kind of decipher it, or they just could be like super descriptive? Because I saw one of your videos where you talk about the flower being an artist, and I was like, well, that's kind of absurd in English. Like, why would you say flower artist? In English it's just artist. You don't have to put the flower in it to know it's an artist, you know? So it's just kind of like I think I just
This
needed.
is all cultural context.
Right. Yeah, no, I like it.
There's things that they know in the back of their head. Just like when you know any language, you know the context, you know what, like the background information. That's the part that you're missing. But when you speak a language, you gain that through experience.
Yes.
So like anything artistic, they tend to express it as like flowery. So like poetry is flowery, art is flowery. Like that's how they see the world. That's why they tell you, like this is like the cosmovision of a person who speaks a language. You have all the background knowledge. When you speak English, there's certain expressions like idioms that don't really literally make any sense, but you know the context and you know exactly what that person is saying because you know the context and you know the background information.
So what about like a new word that doesn't exist? Like how would you adopt the word from another language and use it in Nahuatl?
So there are verbs in Nahuatl that don't exist in like that exist in Spanish, that don't exist in Nahuatl, or that did exist in Nahuatl, but they disappeared. Sometimes they borrow it. Sometimes they use the old word from Nahuatl, or sometimes in Nahuatl you can also construct new words. So for example, there's words for plane, there's words for bicycle, there's words for car, but they're constructed words. And so Nahuatl does have a mechanism to create new words. It's called noun incorporation for nouns, and then Nahuatl also has a way to borrow verbs from Spanish.
Like puerta.
Like what? Puerta.
Puerta.
Like, so for example, they don't have the word for door, puerta, right? So they say puerta. But if you really pay attention to that construction of that word, puerta, it's really a combination between Nahuatl and Spanish. They borrowed the puerta Spanish from Spanish, but they're putting the qua in there. That qua means wooden. So they're saying wooden door, puerta. So they're borrowing it, but they're constructing it in a way that Nahuatl would construct words, and that's noun incorporation, or that's how they combine nouns. So Nahuatl does have a mechanism to create new words.
Thank you.
¿Cuál? So in this case, ya ixpa would become ya Nimichcuahqui, yalguaya. So this ixpa is a verb. If you go look it up in the dictionary, you'll find it as a specific verb. But notice that since it's a pa verb, it's always going to end in, it's going to be a class 4 verb. So I gave you the 4 main class 4 verbs, and any other verbs that are combinations of this verb are also going to follow class 4 rules. Okay, so let me give you more examples. Konek kinahnawa ichichi naman. So notice here it's not nawa, it's nahnawa. There's something called here reduplication. Okay, so here it says konet kinahnawa ichichi naman. So can somebody guess what they think nahnawa probably means?
Lashia, you take a guess. It's your turn.
Is this more specific, like hug?
This is specifically hug. So the other one, which is nawa, is just to hold something in your arms. But nawa is actually to hug. So it's very similar, but the definition changes by this reduplication. You'll learn later that Nahuatl reduplicates or copies the first syllable of a verb to make that verb continuous. So nawa means to carry something in your arms, but nawa literally means to carry something in your arms continuously, which is what a hug is. So kinahnawa can literally be like this person holds something in their arms continuously, but it translates as hug because basically that's what a hug is. You'll notice that other verbs can do the same thing. If you want to say kwa, it means to eat. But if you say kwa, if you reduplicate it, it means to eat and continue eating over and over and over. Say ni choca, I cry. You could say ni chochoca, I cry continuously. I cry over and over and over again. So by reduplicating the first syllable of a verb, now I can make an action continuous.
That's the last lesson I stayed on where you duplicate. And I need to go through the thing again, but I know I'm gonna get it.
¿Cuál? So kenihki moilia y katlempanok, so chipatla y katlempanok, konet kinahnawa y chichinaman. So how would you say it with Yalwaya?
Konet kinahnawa. Sorry, I always have to do my accent or the. So konet kinahnawaque y chichinaman.
Konet kinahnahuahki. So you got it, kinahnahuahki. So all we added is the nawa. From nawa, we added this QAHQUI and it becomes kinahnahuahki. So this is the loudest sound. Okay. Oh, and I put naman, I meant to change it to the Yalwaya, but I mean, if you said this, it would just be like the child hugged her dog today. So it's still in the past tense. It just happened today instead of yesterday. I just try to make it a little bit clear. So here we have another sentence, and we're almost done with the class, by the way. Kinahnawa Itta inintahtawan. And I know these sentences are going to get a little bit more complicated, but don't worry, we'll work through them. But this one is kinahnawa inintahtawan. So first, what does this even mean? Tlenquitos neki.
They hug their parents?
They hug their parents, ¿cuál? And Xicpatla y Catlempanok.
Kinahnahuahque inintatawan.
¿Cuál? Kinahnahuahque. So this, because it's more than one, because they're the ones doing it, it is not nahnahuahqui, it becomes nahnahuahque. They hugged their parents. Notice right here, I put ki, but it could have been switched to kin, Quin, because they're plural. I didn't, but because really honest, you can't hear the difference between ki and kin, kinahnahuahqui, and I also kind of made an error and didn't realize it until now. But actually, this would still work. All right, I don't see you yesterday. Or wait, sorry, I didn't see you. Sorry, it's because I can't see certain parts because my thing gets blocked by all these windows. But I didn't see you yesterday. Kenihki moilia y kanawat.
Ashni mitzita. Yalwaya.
Okay, so if you say ashni mitzita, are you putting something at the end or not?
I'm forgetting. Ashni mitzitak.
Kena. Ashni mitzitak. So what you were missing was just the k, and that k makes the difference between the present and the past. So we say, like you said originally, ashni mitzita. That means I don't see you now. Right now, I don't see you. Ashni mitzita. But ashni mitzitak with the k is yalwaya, yesterday. I didn't see you yesterday. ¿Cuál? I ate fish all day yesterday.
Eight.
So eight.
Ya, michin, and then I know it's ya, and I forgot what eight is, but I know it's like ya, michin.
So ya is him or her, but here we're not talking about him or her.
Ni.
He or she, sorry. So it's got to be ni. And then what about eating? What's the verb for eating?
Licia, what's the word for eating?
Qua.
Oh, Remember, there's only 4 verbs for class 4. Only 4. Huh?
Nimichcuahqui.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
then I don't know the rest. Nimichcuahqui.
So Niqua is in the present. So you need to put it in the past.
So quaki.
Nimichcuahqui. Nimichcuahqui. If you just say Niqua, so if you just say Niqua like he was saying, then it's I eat right now. Niqua, michin. But if you want to change it to in the past, it becomes Nimichcuahqui, michin. I ate fish. And then you may or may not have known this word, and I didn't expect you to necessarily, but I'm trying to increase your vocabulary. So the word for all day is semilwit. So it's literally the word se, one, and ilwit. Ilwit used to be the word for day in classical Nahuatl. So they used to say ilwit for day. Now in modern Nahuatl, they say tonati. But this expression semilwit, it stayed, and it means all day. Semilwit. You'll learn later that this prefix sem, se in front of verbs or in front of nouns, sen or sem, in front of nouns means entire. So putting sen, senilwit or semilwit in front of ilwit, it means entire day, all day. You could say like sen xochitl, entire flower. You could say sen, any noun in front of any noun, sen or sem, depending if it's a it depends if it's an vowel or not, but any noun, if you put sen in front of it, it means entire. I don't know, entire, I ate the entire apple. Niquac senalashos. So, sorry, yeah, semalashos. It would be with an M. Semalashos. I ate the entire orange. Sem. Semalashos. If you want to say, you can put this sen prefix in front of verbs, and it means to do something completely. So if you want to say, I completely ate the fish, you would say, nixen. Nimichcuahqui michin. I ate the entire fish, or I completely ate the fish. Nimichcuahqui. Putting sen in front of a verb means to do something completely. Nimichcuahqui michin. I ate all the fishes or the entire fishes. Or if this was a gigantic fish, I ate the entire fish. You could probably say Nimichcuahqui sen michin. I ate the entire fish. So this sen, which means one, has multiple meanings, but the general meaning is total or complete or entire. So semilwit, that's why semilwit means the entire day, the all day.
So for this sentence, could you also say nimich? Would it also be correct to say nimichcuahqui?
Kena? Nimichcuahqui. Now, when you put Nimichcuahqui, it gives the sense of you were doing this habitually. So I would understand as like yeah, and you could in this it translates really well as Nimichcuahqui because you've been doing this continuously all day. So this you could say Nimichcuahqui semilwich yalguaya, because Michcuahqui gives the meaning when you put these nouns inside of verbs. It gives the meaning of something habitual that you're doing continuously on a consistent basis. So if you saw those pictures of Michnamaka where it says selling fish, Michnamaka, well, it also gives the sense of like this person does it on a habitual basis, on a daily basis, because that's their job, right? Michnamaka. This person continuously or generally always sells fish. That's why we say Michnamaka. It generally is not talking about in a specific instance. When you put it inside a verb, it gives it the meaning of something habitual. So you could, but in this case, since you're doing it all day, you say Nimichcuahqui. It gives that sense like I was doing this like on the regular all day yesterday. Like maybe you were eating it in breakfast, and then you were eating it at lunch, and then you were eating it at dinner. So in this case, it worked really well. Wally. Oh, at noon, we found 3 types of food. Now, I know this is the hardest one and you may not be able to do it, but don't worry, we'll walk you through it. This is more to expand your vocabulary, but what you should focus on if you don't get anything else is the verb we found. If you didn't learn anything and you don't know the other, that's fine, but tell me at least how to say we found.
Tikiasike.
So in this case, It would be ticasique. Ticasique. You said tiki asique. It would be ticasique. Because the ki is followed by an a, it becomes ka. So ticasique, we found. And you probably don't know there's 3 types in food, but I'm going to show you. Okay, at noon, the word for noon in Nahuatl is tiotlak. Tiotlak. And to say that something is happening during a certain time, you put ika in front of it. So you could say ipan or ika in this case. Ipan, sorry. Tiotlak is afternoon. I effed up, messed up. Tlaxcotonal is noon, specifically noon. Literally means half of the day. Tlaxco, half, tonal, tonali, day. Tlaxcotonal. So there's 2 words for day. There's tonati and there's also tonali. So tlaxcotonal means half of the day. So ipan tlaxcotonal at noon, we found ticasique, 3 types of food. I didn't expect you to know the 3 types part, but in Nahuatl, there is a way to say type. And it's the word for tlamantli, the word for things. So eyi tlamantli, it literally means 3 things. But in this sequence, eyi tlamantli tlacuali, in Nahuatl, you're saying 3 types of food. So it's literally 3 things food. But this expression, 3 things food, would be translated as 3 types of food. So eyi tlamantli tlacuali, 3 types of food. In case you were wondering how to say types. Now, at one point, I'm going to do a lesson on like numbers and 3rd, 2nd, 4th, whatever. I didn't do that, but this is just like a preview, I guess. All right, and I think that's my last slide. Oh, no, it isn't. They didn't give us anything. Somebody want to take a shot? This one might be hard, but it's all good. You don't get it, or if you do or don't get it.
Ashkana techmakake.
¿Cuál? Ashkana techmakake. You got the first part. Ashkana techmakake. Of course, you could also say ash techmakake, but Ashkana techmakake is fine, or ahmo techmakake. Those 3 varieties, if you remember the previous classes, these are 3 possibilities. And then ashtle. So notice that in Nahuatl, we're saying nothing, ashtle. Nahuatl does the double negative. Just like in Spanish, when you say no tengo nada, it literally translates to English as I nothing have. No tengo nada. I don't have nothing. You know, like in English, that's like improper to say I don't have nothing. And people make fun of people because like, oh, that's a double negative. Well, in Spanish and in Nahuatl, the double negative is the rule. So this is literally, they didn't give us nothing. But in English, we translate it as they didn't give us anything. But in Nahuatl, it's they didn't give us nothing. Ash techmakake, ashtle. So just so you know that the double negative is the rule in Nahuatl and it's also the rule in Spanish. No nos dieron nada. They didn't give us nothing. And I know it's wrong in English, but whatever. Different languages, different rules. All right. Oh, shoot, I made this crazy. I got crazy. Okay, last part. This one's not that hard.
That's good.
Look at,
That's perfect. Let's go.
Look at these verbs. Which of these are class 1 and which of these are class 4? If you've been paying attention, there's a very quick way to know this, but if you're not paying attention.
Cui is class 1. Itta, I don't know what class it is, but I know cui is the first ones I learned.
Okay, ¿cuál? So class 1. What about ixpa?
I would say that's maybe, I don't know if there's like a 2 or 3, but I mean.
So remember class 4, there's only 4 possibilities, right? There's there's qua, there's nawa, and then there's
no class 4s here.
Mama. There are. This one, this ixpa, because it's one of those pa verbs.
Oh, pa. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm kind of tricking you, but I'm kind of having.
I saw that. Yes.
Like,
I saw
look, there's a pa here, and then this
Nimichcuahqui.
Class 1.
Right?
Class 1.
Well, Nimichcuahqui is class 4 because it's also a qua. So here we're saying eats fish. Nimichcuahqui eats fish like on a regular basis. So these are the only class 4 because they follow that pattern. But all the other ones must be, by process of elimination, they must be class 1. If you go look these up, you'll find out that they are. So cui is to grab, quick, grabbed. Tlazotla, to love, becomes tlazotlak, loved. And Itta is one of the verbs we learned at the very beginning, which is itak. So all of these are class 1 except ixpa and Nimichcuah. So ixpa and Nimichcuah are the only class 4s because they're the pa and the qua verbs. All right. Thank you very much. And Tlatlanilistli. I know most of you asked your questions, but if you haven't, I'm looking at the chat right now. Nobody has questions on the live, but I'm going to look at the YouTube right now and see if other people have questions on the YouTube.
I've been trying to get on these classes for the longest time. I finally got it. I
Yay.
saw it. I immediately clicked on it.
Yay. Well, I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that you finally made it. I hope you didn't get lost. And I hope that if you've been doing the homework, honestly, you'll see that I do it very slowly. Actually, I'm not that advanced, or I actually don't make them that hard. But when you're seeing something for the first time, it seems very hard, but it isn't. I actually am very gradual on what I'm teaching you. And it builds on previous things that you would have known if you had done the other classes. So if you feel like you're missing something, like, oh my God, what is he talking about? It's probably because I covered it in a previous lesson. Okay? Hola. Some people are like, hola, hola, ¿cómo están? Hi guys, how are you doing? Somebody says, I'm here. What about using thou and you instead of you and y'all respectively? You know, that's a good point. I guess Robert Aguilar asked this question, what about using thou and you instead of you and y'all? So, I mean, that's kind of a more of an English question than it is a Nahuatl question. But I don't like, okay, I use you and y'all for a reason. You, because obviously that's what we use currently, and for the second person singular, and y'all for the second person plural. Second person plural. The reason I use y'all and not you guys is because I don't assume that everybody's a guy, and I kind of cringe when people say you guys. So that's why I say y'all. And I know y'all is a Southern expression, but I don't discriminate here. I say y'all, and I don't care. It's the most concise way to say quote unquote you guys. So that's why I use y'all. I guess we could use thou and you, but thou, it means the informal you in older English, and you is the formal you in older English for second person singular. So it doesn't exactly translate for second person plural. So I don't know why you would use you for y'all, because you is singular. So I'm confused about that. Robert Aguilar says, how do I join the Zoom classes? Send me an email or put your email in the comments in one of my videos, and I will email you, or you could email me at the end of the slides for all of the lectures. I have my emails. So just basically email me and then say, I want to be on the class. But do know that this is the second session. So it's a little bit more advanced. It's more like intermediate. So if you feel lost, go watch the first 24 videos, which are the class 1. They are already uploaded on my YouTube. This Fusion Imperial says, is this classical Nahuatl? No, this is Huasteca Nahuatl from Veracruz, specifically Chicontepec, Veracruz. So it's considered Huasteca Nahuatl. I learned classical Nahuatl, and classical Nahuatl is very similar, but a little bit different in terms of the constructions of the words, but I would say it's very similar, but it is not exactly the same. So yeah, this is Huasteca Nahuatl, and somebody say ka Nahuatl Huasteca Katka. So this person is using Central Nahuatl, and I think this person is from Guerrero. They're saying ka, which means no. So Guerrero uses a different word for no, and we use ashkana, but in Guerrero Nahuatl they say ka for no, and then they say katka. Katka is was, and that's the central way to say was. In our variety, we would say el tok, or el toya, or el iyaya. But in this variety, they say katka. So I only know this because I learned classical Nahuatl, and I know the different forms of to be. But if I hadn't learned it, I would be like, what the hell does katka mean? But I do know because I studied classical Nahuatl. All right. Any other questions in Mohuantin?
I have a pretty simple question, but it's for this week's homework, so spoilers.
No problem.
It's just, I'm using a couple different dictionaries, but I'm not using, I think, the most complete ones.
Okay.
There was just one verb that I couldn't find. And I wanted to ask you, I think in that one, is it my question is, Tlen Kistoneki Klaiwikisa? I just couldn't find that definition. It's Klaiwikisa. Do you want me to put it in the chat?
I think it's TLAILHUIQUIZA. Was that in the homework?
Yeah, it was just one of the ones where we had to look up the class. So I found the class from the answer key, but I just was curious what it meant.
I think, and I don't know for sure, but I believe this is to throw a party or something like that. Based on the word and what the words mean. So tla means things, ilwit means like party or day or festival, and kisa to come out. So tla ilwikisa is probably something like throw a party or yeah, to probably have a party. But I got that verb from Personal Lexicon, from the Totlato Nahuatl app, and I have specific verbs that I favorited, and I'm pretty sure I favorited the word tla ilwikisa because it means to throw a party. And I like parties. So yeah. The verbs that I chose are verbs that I like. Like I believe istlacati is in there because I like chisme and lying.
Chisme.
So I did see that one. It's a different one though. It's tla iwi kisa.
Ah, is it with an H?
Yes. So tla IHUI kisa.
Because sometimes some varieties, and it's probably our variety, the il, instead of they saying ilwit, they say ihwit with an H. So tla I, it's probably that would sound right to me. Ihwikisa. I don't know why I can't find it in my dictionary. I'm probably spelling it wrong because I clearly.
ELA.
Okay, so I have a question. What's the difference between? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
What's the difference between Mexika and Otomi? How do I know which one I am?
Oh, what do you mean, like Mexika, you mean?
Mexika, yeah, and Otomi, I'm sorry.
That is a very complicated question because it depends how, oh, there it is, tla ilwikisa, to have a graduation party. Okay, so tla ilwikisa means to have a graduation party. Okay, to know what your ancestry is, that is a complicated question because some people do or do not believe in their, their DNA tests. And so it depends how you interpret DNA tests, which are the groups that they're testing and how they're splitting up the groups. Like, oh, this person's an Otomi versus this person's a Mexika. So if you do a DNA test, they may tell you, oh, you're one tribe or another. But the truth is you don't actually know because it depends what their sample was and who they categorized as Otomi and who they categorized as Mexika. It's also complicated for me to answer this question of who's Otomi versus Mexika because technically the Mexika are considered the quote unquote Aztecs of the 1500s. So in their mind, or one could argue that that only refers to that civilization at that time. And so if you're referring to the Mexika at that time as that, then that's Mexika. Or you can interpret Mexika to mean like a present day indigenous person who follows the cultural traditions, does the danzas, etc. So that's a kind of a complicated question that I don't know how to answer for you. I'll tell you that native speakers who speak Nahuatl today will generally consider themselves Nahuas, not necessarily Mexicas. And when they say the word Mexica, they specifically referring to like the Aztecs. But it's kind of complicated because they also say Mexica Tlatoli to specifically refer to Nahuatl itself, the language. So I don't know how to answer that question. It's kind of complicated.
I can tell.
I also don't know your background.
So I'm from León, Guanajuato, and my dad is from Cuautla, Morelos. And so I've been told that I'm not full, because I have a mustache and beard, but I'm telling them like Native Americans did have mustaches, did have beards. We just didn't shave. That's the only thing. Like we didn't shave, we burned it or we plucked it, you know?
They're saying that because it's more common for them not to have beards or mustaches. I'll tell you that I have a beard and a mustache, and I did my DNA test, and about 35% of my background is from Spain. So I cannot say we're beards and mustache.
I'm not, but, even if I was a little bit Spanish or anything, I don't like that, you know? So I consider myself native or indigenous, and that's it.
Okay.
So, but
impose an identity on you, you choose your identity.
yeah, I refuse to believe that we didn't have beards or mustaches, because if Arabs can have them, white people can have them, Asians can have them, everybody can have. We had them too, I believe. That's my opinion.
Did you take biology or no?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, in school. I mean, I don't know if I remember much of it, but
So you learn like there's different populations have different genes. If you separate populations with each other, some of them are going to have some traits and not others. So chances are that some traits are more popular in one group of people. That doesn't mean that that trait disappeared necessarily, but it means that some are more prevalent than others. So potentially the non-beard is more prevalent, but that does not necessarily mean that they never had them, but it's probably the frequency was lower. So I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I think that's where that's coming from.
Well, I did a lot of research, and I remember as a kid, my beard was really light. But I know that our ancestors used to use like a piece of rock and put it on like their beards or whatever. And then what I think would happen was that they would irritate the skin, and then it would finally not grow out. And that's my personal belief, or that they just plucked it and kept them fine, so the hair was always fine, because they never used a razor. That's why I think. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but
unfortunately I don't have more information for you. I don't know.
It's fine.
Our blood is very mixed, so we're all just mestizos.
I am definitely.
That's what I said.
But I'm not going to impose be like, you're this or you're that. I mean, you're whatever you want to be. Like I learned Nahuatl, but my background is from Michoacan. So literally my blood is more probably Purepecha. That's why I'm learning Purepecha. But I love Nahuatl still. It doesn't mean that because you don't have a background that you can't learn something. So yeah.
Lucia, I'm interested in what you look. I want to show myself. Look, I just want everybody, this is what I look like. And this is why I've been told that because of this. But yeah, it is what it is,
You could, do research on your own. Do like a genealogy, find out what tribes your ancestors came from. Yeah. That might be a better.
Let me see Lucia. I want to see her. Hello.
Yali.
Yali.
With my short hair.
Nah, you look beautiful.
Plaza Kamati.
All right.
Berlin. But dude, I've been following you for a while. I've been trying to get on this. I'm so happy I finally made it. I appreciate everything you do for us. And it's amazing. Like I really look up to you, and I'm thankful for you.
Well, I do this because I had a hard time finding this information. So I want nobody to have trouble. I want this to be free to everybody at all times. So if you want to share my videos, go ahead. I am not going to copyright you. I think that stuff is stupid.
I will definitely share your videos.
Share them
tomorrow.
Share the homework. I really don't care. I care more that the information is disseminated and that nobody has trouble accessing it. That's what I care about. So.
Plaza Kamati Temach Tikatsin.
All right. Ashley. Timoitase. Any other questions?
No, that's it.
Okay. Bueno, Timoitase, Chicueguillok. We'll see each other in a week. Take care and yeah.